Greetings YouTube, the author Mark Simmons here, back for a 7th instalment of my readings from the Psionic Powers Trilogy. In this episode I will be reading a snippet from chapter 13 of my debut novel of the night. In the story so far, our protagonist has found himself and his creator stuck out in the streets as rioters are basically doing what they do, and they basically have to they're trying to find somewhere to stay for the night as the sun's coming up. Of the Night is available on Amazon via Poe Boy Publishing. As always, I have not rehearsed this, so we'll see how it goes. This is an extract. So this is an extract from chapter 13, which, funnily enough, is called Lockdown. So here we go. They crossed the 6 lanes of road without incident. Traffic flowing along the highway like any other day, oblivious to the fighting and looting taking place only a few streets over. Whitfield wondered whether the news of the rioting had managed to spread across all media yet. No matter how much coverage you gave an event, there would always be people who weren't watching or listening. Once off the main road, Whitfield presumed that they would find another vantage point and move over the rooftops, but Kadir led them onwards along a series of back alleys. Are we not heading to higher ground? The streets gave him far less confidence than on any other night. He had already spent more than enough of the evening dodging crazed mobs, and being on the rooftops had been the safest he had felt all night. Kadir pointed to the rows and rows of terraced houses. The slate roofing is too steep for us to try and traverse, so keep your voice down. They kept going at a fast pace. A woman weeping slowed their step as the sound of her tears echoed off the concrete labyrinth, and cautiously Kadir moved along the alleyway towards the source of the moans. In the middle of a crossroads where 4 back alleys met, a middle-aged woman in a skirted black business suit lay on the ground, her leg broken. The shin bone of her left leg was sticking out through her tights. Through her tears, she was unable to see the danger that she was in, and Whitfield was oblivious too as he stepped forward to help her. But Kadir noticed something else and stopped him with a firm hand. She pointed the situation out to Whitfield. A group of police officers were stood at one end of the alleyway. They were all catching a breath as they leant on riot shields or each other, whilst uniformed officers checked over them to see if they were okay. One of the uniforms had heard the crying and moved away from her colleagues. It was clear that she was caught in 2 minds whether to help the woman. If she were to move forward, she would be a long way away from her fellow enforcers, yet it was her job to protect. Whether it was this distance that caused her to pause, or the 3 hoods that stood in plain sight goading her, they would never know. Whitfield hoped that the officer wouldn't come any closer, as she couldn't see the other 12 or so hoods hiding in doorways and behind rubbish bins. Kadir looked back the way they had come with a grimace. It was clear even to Whitfield that going back would add a lot more time to their journey, time they didn't have. Well, come on then, one of the hoods yelled. Do your job and protect her, or are you scared? Whitfield watched the turmoil on the young officer's face, her intentions torn between her desire to do her job and the instincts that were telling her everything about the situation was wrong. In the end, her decision was made for her, as a superior officer called her back to the rest of the group. Seeing that their trap wasn't going to be tripped, the rest of the hoods came out of the shadows to stand with their comrades. We go now, Kadir said as she made a run for it past the injured woman. Whitfield was startled for a second, as he wasn't expecting the sudden movement, but he quickly cottoned on and followed after her. A loud cheer came from behind them as the small group of rioters had found a new quarry to hunt, their bait forgotten as they charged past her in pursuit of new people to maim and torture. Whitfield took a quick glimpse over his shoulder and instantly wished he hadn't. The sight of the young thugs sprinting to catch up with him brought terror up through his skin as a thin layer of sweat. In the second he looked over his shoulder, they had gained on him. He concentrated on trying to keep up with Kadir. The fast woman had already widened a gap between her and her pursuers. Whitfield could hear them getting closer behind him, but he dared not take another look backwards. Instead, he kept his eye on Kadir in hope that he would somehow catch up with her. With a change of direction that any sports person the world over would have been proud of, she darted to her left. Whitfield's hopes sank. But her disappearance also gave him a place to aim for, adding an extra push to his sprint and helping him to reach the turn. As he rounded the corner, his heart went into his mouth, as a wall of shields blocked his path, but more importantly, Kadir had managed to disappear. He came to an abrupt stop and waited for the onslaught of kicks and punches to come smashing down onto him. A strong arm grabbed him around the waist, and a firm hand cupped over his mouth. Off balance, he was pulled backwards over a small balcony into the midst of a miniature jungle of pot plants. He landed, and before he could fight back, Kadir was laid on top of him. She glanced down at him once and then removed her hand from his mouth. If he wanted to complain, the gang of hoods coming to a stop just the other side of the plants stopped him. They lingered only for a moment, but a moment that played out for an eternity, before the mob saw the wall of shields and, giving another cheer, charged forward. Kadir sprang to her feet and was climbing up another drainpipe. The sounds of fighting less than 100 yards to his right worked as an incentive for Whitfield to climb better than last time. With half as many slips as his previous attempt, he was soon on the rooftop with Kadir. "We must hurry." Kadir was already gliding over the rooftops as she finished her sentence. "The assembly hall is not far from here." They kept a steady pace, skipping across the skyline like a British nanny and a one-man band, but they soon came to a stop at the brink of a gap in the buildings. The unmistakable noise of skirmishing rebounded off the concrete below. The expanse below them looked like any other run-down part of the city, the pre-dawn light doing nothing to add to the appeal of the place. The police were once again trying to hold back troublemakers, but it was the 10-foot wooden fence that cordoned off the old theatre from the rest of the city that caught Whitfield's eye. "Does it look as impressive from the front?" Kadir asked him. "Not even slightly." Though he hadn't seen the entrance before, he knew where he was. "So is the glamorous car park entrance you took me through last time out the back." "The car park is actually underground. The council elders thought it would get less people poking around the place if it looked boarded up and abandoned." "I don't know. I would have thought that would attract more." Kadir looked at him confused. "Especially in a city like this. Plenty of homeless people trying to find somewhere that's dry to sleep for the night, and a large old theatre would be ideal." "Agreed." Kadir pointed at the surrounding fence. "However, the theatre is not easily spotted from ground level. Up here you have a prime view, but down there all you see is a high fence with razor wire along the top. Much less appealing, wouldn't you agree?" Whitfield nodded. They watched as the same tactics that had been used earlier were being put to use again by the rioters. Struggling to cope with superior numbers and the manoeuvres of the opposition, the police were close to being overrun. From overhead, a spotlight shone down onto the scene from a police helicopter, surveying the troubles its colleagues were in. Whether the helicopter was relaying the message that they were surrounded, Whitfield would never know. Their situation got worse as a firebomb managed to loop over the wall of shields and explode in amongst the uniformed officers. The flames caught on the non-flame retardant clothes and caused chaos in the middle of their ranks. Some turning away from the front line to go and help out the flames, put out the flames as another barrage of firebombs hit the line of shields. They shattered in the gaps, showering the group with hot liquid and triggering the line to start breaking up. With the line broken, the rioters threw more projectiles and an uneven mob advanced towards the disorder. Thankfully for the police, their co-workers in the helicopter were on hand to help. Seeing that their fellow boys in blue were not going to regroup in time, the pilot took action into his own hands. They swooped down so that they were hovering just above the panicking group. Dipping the helicopter forward, they used the spinning propellers as a deadly shield that brought the attackers to a hasty stop. The front runners were soon pushing back against the late arrivals as the rotating blades forced them back down the street. The line of shields reformed with a new confidence as they found themselves no longer surrounded, and in a well-formed line followed after the pilot. "Let's go," Kadir ordered, and jumped down onto a thick bush of ivory that decorated the abandoned house to their right. Whitfield stood for a second, assessing the distance between himself and the wall opposite. Then he looked down at the drop below. A forest of weeds and nettles grew up through a broken and uneven pathway between the two buildings. "Stop thinking about it and jump," Kadir cajoled up at him. Ignoring the taunt, he launched himself forward. His stomach found its way into his mouth, and as the feeling of weightlessness and then gravity pulling him down took over, it very quickly became apparent that he hadn't created enough momentum in his jump. And as the fourth story and then the third story shot past him, he wondered just how much the fall was going to hurt. As he connected with the second story of ivy, he tried to grab a hold of some of the plant, but the motion of his fall brought him against the wall with too much force. The vines slipped through his hands and he fell. Landing amongst the hard rocks and nettles did hurt, but not as painfully as he was expecting. His lungs emptied on impact, and he was sure he felt a few ribs break. But other than that, he may as well have been falling onto a mattress. "Graceful," Kadir appeared to be holding back a laugh as she reached out a hand to help him up. "I thought I nailed it." Whitfield took her hand and felt the ribs he presumed to be broken pop back into place. Brushing himself off and rubbing the small of his back, he looked to see if there was something soft hidden in the weeds, but all he could see was flattened plants. The impact area seemed too perfect, far too spherical to have been caused by his body. But before he could look closer, Kadir grabbed his arm and led him to the tall fence that surrounded the theatre. "There's a secret entrance in the fence just up ahead." She came to a stop by a lamppost that flickered on and off, its light sensor trying to figure out whether it was still nighttime. Plastered all over the wall, flyers for a modern adaptation of The Tempest had been stuck, one on top of the other, curled at the corners after years of exposure to the elements. Kadir reached under the flyers and seemed to push something inwards. A crack appeared in the wood below the flyers, and Kadir prized it open further with her fingers. "You go first." Car wheels screeching round a corner made them pause, and from off in the distance, 3 black transit vans sped along the empty road towards them. Kadir studied the approaching vehicles briefly before pushing Whitfield forcibly through the small gap and then following him through. "Take it easy, lady, what's the rush?" Whitfield picked himself up off the floor and brushed the dust off the front of his jacket. She didn't answer, but instead made her way past him, up the steps to the front doors of the theatre. They opened as Nikolai Antonescu and Claire Campus filed out to meet them. Whitfield noticed Shannon lingering in the entrance to the doorway, her features clouded with smoke. "You're just in time," Nikolai announced as he looked past them towards the hole in the fence. "We were just about to lock down for the day." Kadir didn't pause to speak and walked past the greeting party. "There was someone coming up after us. We should get inside as soon as possible." "But of course." Nikolai followed her into the theatre. "Couldn't get into the manse either?" Shannon asked the two of them. "Avez is a very cautious man," Kadir replied. From the fence, the sound of orders being given and then metal crashing into the wood confirmed that they had been followed. Claire closed the doors behind everyone, putting a metal bar across the middle, top and bottom of the doors. Gears and levers crunched as multiple locks fell into place in between the 2 large doors. "The sun will be up soon, so unless they are human, they're in trouble," Claire stated as she typed on her tablet. Whitfield could see over her shoulder as a CCTV view of the courtyard looked down from a camera on the roof. as part of the fence bent inwards. A part of the fence bent inwards as something large hit one of the panels directly in front of the entrance, and then dropped back into its original position. The fence strained again, something colliding with it, and with the splintering of wood, the front of the transit van poked its nose through, and quickly disappeared as it was put in reverse. Claire grimaced as the sun crept towards the horizon on screen. Whitfield was confused by a fear of something that clearly couldn't harm her. From the crack in the fence, two forms squeezed through and made their approach towards the entrance. But the sun had them in its sights. Claire turned the screen off as the sun broke across the horizon, the fate of those two men unclear. Judging by Claire's pained expression, it had not turned out well for them. So there you go. Long one. Oh, bloody hell, really long one. Yeah. That's chapter 13. Deep in the Riots. If you liked it, let me know. If you didn't like it, let me know. Links for Of the Night, US and UK editions are from Amazon or in the description, along with my Twitter handle, my Instagram handle, my Facebook author page. Yeah, let me know what you thought. And again, Of the Night, extract from chapter 13. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.